Hey guys, it's Mike here, and today I'm going to be bringing you the first in a series of marathon reviews I'll be doing for Laughingstock Cinema. As the series continues, the format will likely change somewhat, but this series will feature myself and sometimes guests marathoning a series of movies or a season of a TV show, and then reviewing it as a whole and seeing whether the films or shows are better when viewed back to back. In today's video, I'll be reviewing the Saw movies, as I've just watched all 7 of them. Now, as far as the Saw franchise goes, I've always liked them. They're a good mixture of mystery and horror, dealing in equal parts suspense and brutality. As a result, many have dubbed the films torture porn, and have credited the series for kicking off that trend in movies. The original film was a low-budget film that took the cinematic world by storm and spawned a franchise that produced a film a year until its initial run concluded with Saw 3D: The Final Chapter. Well, much like Friday the 13th, this didn't live up to its name as Jigsaw. The next entry in this long-running franchise is in theaters this month, just in time for the Halloween spot it owned for years. So this is as good of a time as any to review the entire series. Now let's get started with the original Saw, which was directed by James Wan and co-created by Wan and Lee Wanell, who together with other writers wrote the rest of the films in the franchise. The film begins in an old bathroom with our main characters who are being imprisoned, each having a shackle attached to their foot. A man with an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound lies dead on the floor. Our 2 captives are Adam, played by co-creator Lee Wanell, who wakes up in a half-filled bathtub, and Dr. Gordon, played by Carrie Elways from Princess Bride fame. Gordon is the more central character in this film. Neither men are aware of why or how they ended up in the bathroom, and therein begins the mystery of the film. What's interesting about this film is how they deliver the information to the characters and the audience. It's usually piece by piece, having us and our protagonists put it all together, much like a jigsaw puzzle. Adam and Gordon receive cassette tapes from the man known as Jigsaw, which explain to them the rules of this game and give them clues to figure out their salvation. Jigsaw is a criminal who has been labeled a serial killer. However, the traps he places his victims into always have a means of escape, although with horrible consequences. Much of those whom die do so because they take too long or didn't follow the rules. But Jigsaw himself never truly kills anyone, at least from his perspective. This is part of what makes him such an interesting villain as we see throughout the series. The film doesn't entirely take place in the bathroom, however, as it's also split between Detective Tapp, who's played by Danny Glover from Lethal Weapon fame. Tapp is a detective who has long been hunting Jigsaw, trying to stop him. At one point in the past, he was able to locate Jigsaw's hideout. However, he and his partner rushed in foolishly, and they encountered Jigsaw, which led to Tapp's throat being cut and his partner being killed. By the time of the story, he's become obsessed and wants revenge for his partner, while also suspecting Gordon of being involved in the killings. At one point, he actually approaches Dr. Gordon and shows him a Jigsaw victim named Amanda, trying to see if he may be in on it. I think Glover does a good job with what he's given, although perhaps we could have seen more of his downward spiral happen on screen. Now, as the film goes on, we discover that Gordon's family is being held captive by the man we believe is the Jigsaw killer, Zepp, who was an orderly at Gordon's hospital. We also discover through Gordon's wife that Adam cannot be trusted, and that Tapp actually hired Adam to take pictures of Gordon. However, as Tapp is watching Gordon's house, Gordon's wife is able to escape, and the sounds of gunshots attracts Tapp, who engages in a struggle with Zepp and chases him to the location of the bathroom. Gordon, meanwhile, can't take letting his family suffer anymore, and in an amazing scene, saws off his own foot and shoots Adam with the dead man's gun. After this happens, Tapp is killed in a struggle with Zepp, and Zepp enters the bathroom, saying the time is up and he has to kill Gordon, a part of the rules. However, Adam is actually alive and kills Zepp by bashing his brains in with the top of a toilet seat. Gordon tells Adam he has to leave before he bleeds out, and he'll come back with help, and then drags himself from the bathroom. However, this is when the best scene of the film happens, when Adam finds a tape recorder on Zepp's body, with a tape saying he's been poisoned by Jigsaw and must do everything he did in the film in order to receive the antidote. Suddenly, the dead man on the ground rises up, revealing he was actually Jigsaw all along, and the key to Adam's shackle was in the bathtub he awoke in, long since gone down the drain. He leaves Adam in the bathroom, turning off the lights and saying his iconic line of "game over" before shutting the door as Adam screams. And with that, the first Saw movie ends. Overall, I think this is a great horror movie with equal parts mystery and intensity. It has some great traps and is the birth of a great villain. It's a modern horror classic, and the twist is a cherry on the top that makes the film that much more impactful. It's certainly not as violent and graphic as the following films, but the narrative really carries it, and considering all the limitations it had to work with, it's probably the better for it. Up next is Saw 2, which is another great entry in the franchise. The film starts with a Saw game in motion as an informant finds himself in a death mask that will kill him unless he can find a key in time and release himself. However, as we find out, the key is behind his eye, and he has to remove it with a scalpel. He can't do it in time, however, and dies. He's soon discovered and investigated by the protagonist of the film, Detective Matthews, who is played by Donnie Wahlberg from New Kids on the Block. Matthews is a single father who has his problems with his son and is going through a divorce, and the dead informant actually worked for him. Soon, however, Matthews and his team are able to discover Jigsaw's location, and as they enter, and after some booby traps trigger, taking out some of the SWAT team, they find Jigsaw sitting there waiting for them. However, he's not able to move from his location as he's attached to medical equipment and he's revealed to be dying of cancer. As opposed to many horror villains, Jigsaw is pretty much out in the open throughout this film as he and Matthews have a long conversation. This is something that Jigsaw actor Tobin Bell really excels at, and makes this film really enjoyable as a result. Jigsaw reveals his true name to be John Kramer, who is a patient of Dr. Gordon. He's dying of cancer, but that isn't why he became who he did. It was after he tried to take his life in a car accident and failed that he understood the value of what life truly was, and he vowed to spend the rest of his life testing people to make them understand what he sees. And according to him, he isn't a killer. This conversation really helps to further elaborate on the character of Kramer and take it from a simple matter of black and white to a gray subject. Many of those he places in his traps are detriments to society who have done bad things. So these films ask you to question whether what Saw is doing is really evil. However, as we soon discover, Kramer has another Saw game unfolding, and Matthews' son Daniel is among the victims in the game. He tells Matthews that he wants him to play a game, and the rules are that he must stay where he is. And this is what truly sets the story in motion and adds to the tension with a ticking clock. The group of victims is being kept in an abandoned house, which apparently has nerve gas pumping in through the vents. If the captives are unable to get the antidote and leave in time, they'll all die a horrible death. Those in the house have all been in prison save for Daniel. One of them is actually the victim Amanda from the first film, who is played by Shawnee Smith. She's been through this before, so she explains the situation and finds the tape from Jigsaw. It says the numbers with the safe with the antidote are in the back of their minds. Throughout the house are various traps, such as a gun behind a peephole of a door, which kills one man who tries to open it. In another room is a pit full of used syringes, which the drug dealer character Xavier is supposed to go into and find a key from. However, he's the jerk of the group and instead throws Amanda, who is a recovering heroin addict, into the pit. Of course, she can't get in time. And then there's another trap where one of the victims is revealed to actually have helped kidnap the others. He has to climb into a furnace and get 2 syringes of the antidote, but he's burned alive once he grabs the second. As we come to find out, the connection between all the victims of the Saw game were arrested by Detective Matthews, who is a dirty cop and planted evidence on them. Amanda didn't even use drugs until she had them planted on her and was sent to jail. Now, while everyone is dying, Xavier goes nuts and starts killing members of the group, discovering that each of them have a number tattooed on their necks. Matthews can't take it anymore and beats beats down Kramer, forcing him to say where the house is. He and Kramer leave together to the house while the SWAT team finds the location of the game footage and goes after them. Amanda and Daniel escape through a trap door to find the bathroom from the first Saw under the house. When Xavier comes into the room, he cuts his number from off his neck and tries to attack them, but is actually killed by Daniel using Gordon's saw. As Matthew arrives at the house, the SWAT team arrives at a different house, and in a shocking twist discovers that the footage has actually been set to a delay. As the time expires, a safe next to where Kramer and Matthews were sitting opens, revealing Daniel to still be alive inside. Matthews then finds the bathroom to be empty aside from the bodies of Xavier and Adam, and is attacked by someone in a pig mask who tranquilizes him. He then awakens as he's chained to a pipe and finds a cassette player. It reveals that Amanda has actually been in on everything the whole time and was actually Jigsaw's apprentice. We see flashbacks of her helping Jigsaw, and then she slams the door on Matthews, saying game over like the end of the original. Overall, I really like this movie. It may even be my favorite of the series. Although the twists may not be as shocking as in the original, they really expanded upon the lore of Jigsaw and made him a more on-screen character. There were also a lot more interesting traps in this movie, and the film handled having more characters really well. Next up is Saw 3, and this is probably where the movies start to see a decline in quality for me, with many of the problems beginning with this film. However, I'll get more into that later. Now, the film begins where 2 ends as Matthews is able to free himself from the bathroom by smashing his foot with a toilet top. However, he's stopped by Amanda and tranquilized again. Meanwhile, his partners Agent Rigg and Detective Carey, who Matthews had an affair with, are searching for him. However, Carey is soon kidnapped by someone in a pig mask and placed into a trap which will pull her ribs out if she doesn't unlock it with a key, which is also inside a beaker of sulfuric acid. However, she's able to get the key out and unlock it, but oddly the trap is inescapable and kills her. She also happens to see Amanda standing in front of her before she dies, implying she may be the one who set this whole thing up. Soon after this, we're introduced to Dr. Lynn, a surgeon who's apparently having problems with her lover who wants her to get a divorce. She shows her medical savvy by saving a child, but is quickly kidnapped by another pig mask. This sets up the plot of the film, as Amanda had kidnapped her in order for her to take care of John Kramer, who is literally on his deathbed, and she's not able to refuse either, as an explosive collar is attached to her neck, and if Kramer dies, she dies. However, Kramer is playing another Saw game, and if the man he's playing with succeeds, she can go free. The newest victim is named Jeff, whose son was tragically killed by a drunk driver. However, the driver was able to get off with little punishment due to a number of extenuating circumstances. This has taken its toll on Jeff, who is consumed by the lust for revenge, which is also affecting his remaining family of a daughter and wife who seems to be out of the picture. As a result, all of the tests tie into this. The traps are a lot more gruesome in this film as well, with the first being a woman chained up in a freezer with sprinklers which keep going off on her. She was actually a witness to Jeff's son's death, however she ran away and didn't want to be involved. Jeff waits too long and she's frozen to death, so he moves on. The second trap features the judge who let the killer off, who is chained inside of a vat. Rotten pigs are put through a grinder and their liquefied remains fill the vat. As much of this Saw game is about Jeff letting go, he has to burn his son's possessions, which contain a key to let the judge live. He actually does succeed this time. While all of this is happening, we learn more about Amanda and Kramer's relationship, how he set up her Saw game, her escape, and then how they met as he was waiting for her at her home. She pledges herself to him and says she'll leave the drugs and self-abuse behind. However, it's clear that the tasks he sends her on are just too much for her. We see in a flashback as she helps set up Dr. Gordon's test, and after as she suffocates Adam with a plastic bag. However, as we discover, John's brain is herniating, and Dr. Lynn must perform brain surgery on him using tools she has available to her. And they show the whole thing in graphic detail, as she cuts through his scalp, saws through and removes a piece of his skull, and removes the membrane from around his brain. It's all pretty gruesome, but it's also some great practical effects work. However, during the scene, John remembers happy times he spent with his wife, and says he loves her, which Amanda interprets him saying to Lynn, which is a signal for bad things to come. But after the procedure is when Jeff and the judge encounter the next trap. featuring the reverse crucifix called the rack, which twists each limb of its victim's body until it reaches his head. The victim is the drunk driver who killed Jeff's son, and the only way for him to free him is to reach into a box with a shotgun and remove the key, which will trigger the gun. At first, it seems like Jeff might allow the driver to die, but changes his mind and carefully removes the key. This isn't enough, however, as the gun goes off and shoots the judge in the head, killing him. And Jeff also isn't able to find the key lock in time, so the driver dies. Now after this, while Jeff is making his way toward the room, Amanda pulls a gun on Lynn and refuses to let her leave, saying John doesn't care about her and the doctor needs to die. He says their fates are linked, however she still shoots Lynn in the stomach. As Jeff enters and sees this, he shoots Amanda in the neck with his own gun. As she's dying, Jigsaw tells her that Jeff and Lynn are married, and this was actually Amanda's test all along, to see if she'd actually allow someone to keep their life instead of taking one. But she made inescapable traps and she fails, so it's game over for her. John gives Jeff the chance to forgive him and take his wife, or to kill him. Jeff picks up a circular saw and cuts John's throat. As he dies, Jigsaw plays a tape saying that he was the only one who knew the location of Jeff's daughter, whom he kidnapped, and the bomb collar explodes, killing Lynn. And with that, the movie ended. Although I like this movie more than the last time I saw it, for me, this was definitely the start of a downturn in the quality of the series. Pretty much everyone fails in this movie, and Jigsaw, who is really the strongest part of the films, is killed, which causes the problem of excessive flashbacks in the following films and the reliance on other characters. However, there are some good moments, and Tobin Bell once again gives a really good performance. Next up is Saw 4. Rather than the usual opening of someone in a trap, this movie starts with an autopsy being performed on Kramer's dead body. There's no illusions of his survival from the last movie. He's definitely dead. This autopsy is once again shown in full detail, and it's definitely disgusting. Inside of John's stomach, they find another cassette tape, which is something he swallowed in the last film. The tape was meant for Detective Hoffman, played by Costas Mandylor, who is briefly shown in Saw 3, and says that despite Kramer being dead, Hoffman will still be tested and the games have just begun. After this, Hoffman meets up with Agent Rigg from Saw 2 and 3, who finds the dead body of his partner, Detective Carey. Well, at first, Hoffman thinks it must have been Jigsaw or Amanda's trap. Rigg and two other agents named Strom and Perez believe it was the work of someone else. Rigg takes on a lot of focus and becomes one of the main characters of the film. The deaths of his partners have taken their toll on him mentally and emotionally, and we also find out more about his past, such as a flashback of when he attacked a suspected pedophile. The agents speculate about his potential involvement, however he's attacked and wakes up in his home to discover a Saw game that's unfolding. He sees a live feed of Detective Matthews, who has been held captive, being on top of a block of ice, with Detective Hoffman next to him tied up in a chair. Rigg has until the ice melts and the set time runs out to save them. And of course, this sets the plot in motion as Rigg has to navigate various Saw traps on his way to save them. The first victim he finds is actually in his own house, which is a prostitute who is tied up to a chair and has a machine pulling her by the hair until her scalp comes off. Rigg is given a chance to leave her, but rescues her from the machine. However, once he does this, she attacks him, as she's also been given a tape and a knife to kill him with. Of course, Rigg kills her in self-defense before he leaves. The next place he goes to is a rundown apartment where he finds a box with a pig mask and a tape telling him he must take the desk keeper captive. He brings him into a room filled with pictures of abused women, and we discover that he's apparently a rapist who makes snuff films by chaining up his victims in a bed. In a bit of poetic justice, the man is chained up to a bed and must use a machine to gouge out his eyes before a timer is up. However, he's brutally torn apart by the machine when the timer ends. The next trap he discovers is an older couple who are impaled together in a school. Rods go through non-vital points on the wife, but they're inside several vital organs and points on her husband. The wife must pull the rods from her, killing her husband in the process to escape. However, the husband is revealed to be an abuser, and the wife follows through on it while Rigg is told by Jigsaw to watch it happen to see how how he rehabilitates someone. In the meantime, Agents Strom and Perez are tracking Rig down as they discover his house and the preceding traps. They believe all of this isn't Rig's work, but rather is a plot to recruit him. They track down John Kramer's wife, Jill Tuck, who is played by Betsy Russell. They interrogate her, and after Detective Perez is seemingly killed by a saw puppet, which explodes shrapnel into her face, Jill reveals to them more about John's backstory in happier times. We learn that John was a civic engineer whose foundation developed property for needy people. He worked together with a partner who is also a lawyer named Art Blank. His wife ran a recovery clinic for drug addicts, and during this time she became pregnant with their child, who John named Gideon after his first building, which was a meatpacking plant. The iconic Bill doll was also actually something John was planning to give to his child. However, one night the clinic was held up by an addict and Jill was hit in the stomach with a door, which caused her to miscarry the child. This event was very traumatic for John and went a long way toward his development toward becoming Jigsaw, and he would later kidnap the addict and put him through his first Saw game, which required him to push his face through a mask of knives in order to save himself. However, once he does, he attempts to attack John and instead ends up tangled in razor wire, which is perhaps a callback to a trap Tapp witnessed in Saw 1. All of these flashback scenes are probably the best parts of the movie, as Tobin Bell continues to be excellent in his role, however the story chooses to use his character. After this, we discover that John's partner, Art Blank, is the one whom is holding Matthews and Hoffman captive, and set up this whole game. As Matthews and Hoffman attempt to escape, he tells them that they'll be able to leave alive if Riggs doesn't get there in time. However, this is where everyone begins to converge on the location, as Rig finds the building. Agent Strom shows up after, figuring out the location was John's meatpacking building. As this is happening, we see Jeff, the victim from the last film, and discover that this is taking place at the same time. After Jeff shoots Amanda and kills Jigsaw, Strom accidentally kills him, thinking he's in on everything. He finds Jigsaw's body, but is locked in another room. Rig finds the door leading to where Matthews and Hoffman are being held and runs to barge through it. Matthews tries to stop him, shooting him in the process, but it's too late as Rig comes through the door, setting off a trap which kills Matthews by smashing his head between two giant blocks of ice, which also seemingly kills Hoffman. However, as Art tries to tell Rig what's happening and pulls out his cassette tape, Rig shoots him, killing him. He plays the tape to discover that Art was being forced to do everything as a part of a Saw game of his own, and Art was actually the lawyer for the pedophile that Rig punched. However, in the twist of the movie, we find out that Hoffman is still alive and was working with Jigsaw as his apprentice. He shuts Rig in the room, walking out. Game over. Overall, I'm not a big fan of this movie. It's definitely one of my least favorite of the series, and I didn't care much for the ending, which becomes sort of a recurring theme after the second film. The way Matthews is killed seems pretty contrived, with Rig getting there 1 second before he would have lived, and the rules seem pretty murky. It seems like much of it served to get rid of what happened at the end of the last film, which also feels a bit like a cop-out. The twist with Hoffman being a bad guy isn't that big of a surprise, but in retrospect, it was foreshadowed as soon as the third film, so it fits in with the continuity. And of course, another problem which all of the movies after 3 have is that Jigsaw only appears in flashbacks, and while he's good while he's used, the story shifts more towards his apprentices and legacy in future films. It's just alright. The next movie, Saw 5, returns to the classic Saw opening, with a game already in motion. This one features a murderer in a trap who's strapped to a table with a pendulum blade swinging over his torso. In order to stop the blade, he has to place his hands into vices that will crush them. However, even once he does this, the blade continues to descend and cuts him in half. I feel like they must have fun with these openings since they get to start the film in such an unconventional way while using elaborate traps. But in either case, the film then recaps and continues the ending from the last film, as Agent Strom is attacked by Hoffman in a pig mask who places him into another inescapable trap. This one involves his head being in a clear box which is filled with water. However, Strom is able to use his pen to give himself a makeshift tracheotomy, breathing through it and surviving. Meanwhile, Detective Hoffman recovers Jeff's kidnapped daughter from inside the building and hands her over to the police, thinking he's the only survivor. However, Strom Strahm is also recovered from the scene and taken to the hospital. After this happens, we see Jigsaw's wife Jill is meeting with an attorney about John's will. Apparently, he left a box with a videotape for her. In the tape, he says that he always loved her and reveals that he felt responsible for their unborn child's death, as he encouraged her helping at the clinic. He also had some unfinished business for her to carry out and left her a box for that purpose. This becomes important in future movies. Now, after this, Hoffman is honored at an event for fallen officers who died in the line of duty trying to take down Jigsaw. We see the pictures of Agent Rigg, Detective Carey, and of course Detective Matthews as Hoffman gives a speech about the value of human life and stating that justice was served. This is really where Hoffman starts to take center frame as the villain of the last 3 films of the series, and this film is very much about him as a result. After his promotion, Hoffman finds an envelope in his office with a paper saying, "I know who you are" on it. Hoffman then decides to go to the hospital and see what Agent Strahm knows. Strahm suspects Hoffman is involved because he walked out nearly unscathed, and soon after Strahm is taken off the case by his superior. And this is the part that really sets the plot in motion, as the film becomes about Strahm trying to figure out who the other Jigsaw apprentice is and if he can connect the dots to Hoffman. Meanwhile, in classic Saw fashion, Hoffman has yet another Saw game unfolding. This time it returns to more of a group format as 5 people awaken to find themselves attached to collars which are connected to blades. A tape tells them that they're all connected and that if 4 of them pull, one of them will be pulled into the blades. However, they all have to grab a key which is away from them, forcing them to move forward. And what's worse is that there's a time limit that will automatically pull all those still attached into it when it elapses. However, the tape also tells them that they need to do the opposite of what their instincts tell them. Either way, 4 escape and the blonde firefighter is killed when she's decapitated, but they have to move on quickly before nail bombs go off. The next game appears to be yet another elimination game, as they end up in a room that looks like a sewer with gated chambers in the walls. Only 3 of them will be able to open as there's only 3 keys, so one of the members, a reporter, is knocked out from behind, and while the other members of the group get into their safe places, the reporter is killed by the bombs. After this, we learn more about how everyone in the game was connected. Apparently, one of them was given drugs to burn down a supposedly abandoned building, which killed some people in the process, and was a part of a scheme for land development. One of them was a clerk who gave permits for construction, and another's dad owned a sports team who was involved in the location. This leads to the next test, which is pretty crazy, as someone needs to climb into a bathtub and connect 5 electrical wires to open the door. However, no one is willing to do it. So naturally, the file clerk kills the daughter of the sports team owner, puts her in the bathtub, and attaches the wires to her dead body. The door opens, and the remaining 2 move on. While all of this is happening, Agent Strahm is doing some digging on Hoffman, trying to piece together how he met Jigsaw and became who he is. This is a vehicle which serves to give the audience more exposition and backstory on Hoffman. Apparently, his sister was murdered by her boyfriend, and she was his last living family member. This caused him to become filled with a lust for revenge, leading to him setting up the pendulum trap we see in the beginning of the movie, with the boyfriend being his victim. However, after he made it look like a Jigsaw trap, John Kramer attacked him and tied him up to a chair with a shotgun under his chin. John says he doesn't like being credited with Hoffman's murder, and that he gives people a chance to survive. He isn't a true killer from his point of view, and he believes that rehabilitation through his methods are better than vengeance. The shotgun is revealed to be unloaded, and he gives Hoffman the chance to join him or to turn him in, which will release information on him to the public. Hoffman joins John and helps him to set up traps as his apprentice. We see them set up the barbed wire trap that Tapp finds in the first film. John also gives Hoffman Dr. Gordon's pen and asks him to lead Tapp to Gordon so he'll suspect him. Hoffman also helps John to set up the house game from Saw 2. John gives him another great Jigsaw line that, if you're good at anticipating the human mind, you leave nothing to chance. And then finally, we see as John gives him a file during the events of Saw 3, which he says Hoffman won't understand until it's over. The file contained the pictures of the 5 members of the group who are in this movie's Saw game. After figuring everything out, Strahm tracks down Hoffman's location where the game is taking place. However, the two remaining members of the group find the final trap, which requires them to stick their hands into a blade which will fill a beaker with blood. However, they discover that there are actually 5 slots. Then they realize that there was a way for all 5 of them to survive each trap, and that what the tape meant about ignoring their instincts was actually keeping all of them alive. They put their hands into the blade and fill the beaker, however the arsonist pushes his hand too far, which caused the blade to go through his wrist, resulting in his death. After this, Strahm's superior, Agent Erickson, arrives and discovers evidence Hoffman planted to make it look like Strahm was behind everything, and finds the survivor of the Saw game. Strahm arrives at the building to find a room with a clear box that we saw John Kramer had designed in an earlier flashback. Above it is a cassette tape that tells Strahm he has to enter the box to survive. However, he pauses the tape and engages in a fight with Hoffman. Strahm throws Hoffman into the box and closes the door. However, this activates a trap, which causes the walls to start closing in like a trash compactor. Strahm then plays the rest of the tape, saying the box will bring him to safety, and if he doesn't get in it, the room will kill him. But it's too late, as Hoffman is lowered out of the room and Strahm is crushed to death. Game over. So that was Saw 5, and honestly I like it a lot more than Saw 4, and maybe even 3. Although Hoffman may not be the villain Jigsaw was, the film goes out of its way to give us his backstory, developing him and making his motivations more understandable. Strahm trying to expose him was also an interesting story. However, the only thing I'm not the biggest fan of is again the ending. And while the idea of Strahm being crushed to death is cool, the fact that he only had to keep listening to the tape for a few more seconds and would be fine was a little ridiculous. It comes off more as sheer incompetence and luck that it even transpired. And while much of the film ties into Jigsaw's words about anticipating the human mind, this was more like anticipating human stupidity. But either way, it's one of the better entries in the series. Next we'll get into Saw 6, which begins again with another trap. This time a couple of predatory lenders have traps attached to their heads which will kill them. However, in order to win, they have to cut off enough of their flesh to tip a scale in their favor. The woman who is thinner cuts off her arm, while the man who's overweight starts cutting off chunks of his fat, which is pretty amusing. But bone weighs more than fat and the woman wins it while the other is killed. After this, Hoffman is shown leaving the box from the ending of Saw 5. He walks back into the room to find Strahm's mangled body still hanging from the ceiling. He takes one of Strahm's hands to plant fingerprints with it. After this, Hoffman meets with the woman who cut her arm off at the beginning of the film, and when he asks her if she learned anything, she shows him the stub of her arm and says she doesn't know what she can learn from that, which seems to imply the rehabilitation didn't work. Hoffman later meets with Strahm's superior, Agent Erickson, and to his surprise, Agent Perez, who survived. They say they'll work together with Hoffman to figure out who's behind everything, although as the movie goes on it becomes more clear that they actually suspect Hoffman. For example, they go to a doctor who performed an autopsy on one of the newest victims, and he says that John Kramer used a particular knife to cut jigsaw pieces from his victims. However, the cut piece we see on this particular victim used a different knife, which incidentally is the same knife used to cut a piece from the man who killed Hoffman's sister. During this, we also see John's wife, Jill, who reveals the contents of the box she received in the last film. Inside are envelopes numbered 1 through 6, as well as another package. One of the envelopes contains a picture of a reporter who told Hoffman about Jill receiving the box in the last movie. Hoffman eventually takes the envelopes from Jill, saying he works alone. However, Jill keeps the 6th one for herself, as well as the package, saying that she's fulfilling John's last request. One of the things I like about this movie is we see more backstory on John and Jill's relationship. We see a scene, for example, where the two are arguing about drug addiction, and John disagrees with Jill's method of rehabilitation. He shows her Amanda, who she knew as a drug addict, and says his method works and she's cured. It's interesting how both of them seem to be working on the complete opposite of the spectrum for the same goals. Now, while the events with Jill are taking place is when the true Saw game of the film begins, as we're introduced to an insurance agent named William Eastman. He's someone who has been shown turning down people for health insurance and devised his own formula to determine risk, liability, and coverage. And he was also the one who turned down John for his coverage when he was seeking to undergo experimental treatment for his cancer. During their meeting, John gives a great monologue about the insurance companies and healthcare in other countries versus the United States. Eastman tries to justify himself, but John says he's mistaken about many things. And of course, this leads to him being kidnapped and inserted into a Saw game. The first trap involves Eastman and his janitor attached to clamps with oxygen masks over their faces. Whenever they breathe, the clamps move closer and crush their rib cages. They both try to hold their breaths, but the janitor is a smoker and is killed. Meanwhile, we see a woman and her son are being held captive in a cage. There's an enclosed vat filled with sulfuric acid next to a switch that says live or die. Also in a cage is the reporter who told Hoffman about the box Jill received. And of course, Hoffman is watching as everything transpires. The next trap Eastman encounters requires him to take hold of two levers. Beyond a window is a pit which two people are standing over as a platform beneath them is slowly disappearing. The levers are attached to each platform. A tape tells Eastman that one is a middle-aged woman who has a family but is at risk for diabetes. The other one is a young intern with no family but is in perfect health. The whole thing is metaphorical of how he chooses who lives or dies with his coverage. Eastman picks the woman and the intern is killed by being hung. Next up is a maze with super hot steam shooting everywhere. Eastman has to expose himself to the steam so a woman can get through the maze before a device punctures her brain. The whole thing almost feels like a video game. She's able to get through, however the key is revealed to be in Eastman's stomach. So of course she tries to kill him to get it, but time runs out and she's killed instead. In between these traps, we see Jill bring a package she kept from Hoffman to the hospital and deposit it through someone's door. We also see flashbacks of more events surrounding Hoffman and John Kramer. These events take place around the time of Saw 3, as Hoffman, Amanda, and John are setting up Jeff's game. Hoffman drops someone on the floor carelessly, and Jigsaw questions if he enjoys brutality, to which Hoffman responds that John likes what he does as much as Hoffman. Amanda and Hoffman then argue, and you can tell that John is really disappointed in both of them. After this, he sees Jill at the factory and gives her a key to the box with the envelopes. It's also during these flashbacks that we find out that Amanda was the one who pushed the drug addict into breaking into Jill's rehab facility, which led to her miscarriage. Hoffman knows about this and blackmails Amanda into shooting Dr. Lynn in the third movie, which of course leads to her death. The last trap Eastman encounters involves a group of his employees being attached to a wheel. When the wheel stops, a shotgun will kill them. Eastman can only choose up to 3 of them to live. He makes his choices and he has to watch the others die. After this happens, Hoffman receives a call from Agent Erickson, telling him to come to their off-station site where they're descrambling Hoffman's Jigsaw audio. When he arrives, they finish descrambling it, revealing it to be his voice. He knows he's screwed and kills all of them before they can arrest him. Before he kills Perez, he asks her who knows about him. She says everyone, but he says she's lying. Hoffman burns the building down and plants Strom's fingerprints with his severed hand before he leaves. After this, Eastman walks into the area of the building he's in that has the mother, her son, and the reporter in cages. However, the wife actually recognizes Eastman as the man who turned down her husband for healthcare coverage, which led to his death, and it was actually her test all along. And apparently the reason why the reporter was there is because she was in a relationship with Eastman. The mother is given a choice to kill Eastman with the live or die switch. However, she can't bring herself to do it. The son, on the other hand, can certainly do so, as he flips the switch and a board with injectors comes down, lodging itself into Eastman's back and melts him to death with acid. Game over. Meanwhile, Hoffman is attacked by Jill and tied to a chair with a reverse bear trap on his head. She leaves him to die, however Hoffman breaks his hand with the trap to get free from the chair, and then smashes his face through a barred window. The trap activates, but it's stopped from killing Hoffman by the bars. He gets free, but the trap rips part of his face off in the process, and with that, Saw 6 ends with him screaming in pain. Overall, I think this is one of the best entries in the series. It has a clear message, some cool traps and answers some lingering questions. However, this film definitely feels like setup for the next one, with things being clearly left open to be answered in a sequel. I'm not sure if I like this more than 5, but I would definitely say it's better than 3 and 4. And now finally we'll get into Saw 7, also known as Saw 3D: The Final Chapter, which was the last film in the original run of this series. As the movie opens, we finally get to see some of what happened after the ending of Saw 1, as Dr. Gordon crawls through the hallways. He places the stub of his leg against the hot pipe and cauterizes it, which of course is going to be really painful. After this, we see another elaborate trap that's in the middle of a town square. This one features men who are both lovers of the same woman who is stringing them along. She slowly descends above a giant circular saw while the boyfriends must push it to one side, killing the other to save her. However, they both decide that she isn't worth it and let her die to save themselves. The whole way they do this is kind of comical. After this, we see as Hoffman is still alive and is searching for Jill, but she's able to escape. Although at one point we're made to think that she's been captured and placed into an inescapable trap by Hoffman, which actually cuts her in half in an over-the-top way, it's all revealed to be a dream sequence, which I think only existed to put in the trailer, and to use more 3D shots. After all, this film jumped on the 3D hype train along with many other movies at the time, and there's a number of shots which exist only to see things coming out of the screen. But I guess it adds that old-school slasher exploitation feel to the movie, as this used to be commonplace for many of the franchises. In either case, this is enough to cause Jill to go to internal affairs and incriminate Hoffman in exchange for immunity and her safety. An agent named Gibson who witnessed Hoffman kill an unarmed suspect is the one who accepts her proposal. Jill is then brought to a safe house. However, Hoffman knows where they are and contacts Gibson with an ultimatum to give Jill to him or else they'll all die. And of course, Gibson declines. While all of this is happening, the film also focuses on a supposed Jigsaw survivor named Bobby, played by Sean Patrick Flannery from the Boondock Saints, a self-help guru who turned the tale of his Saw game, which saw him hoist himself to safety using hooks through his chest, into his own success. He's accompanied at all times by a publicist and does interviews about his survival, as well as giving a speech at a Jigsaw self-help group. We see as Dr. Gordon is there, now with a prosthetic leg, and he mockingly applauds Bobby. However, soon after this, Bobby is kidnapped and placed into a Saw game. It's revealed that Bobby was in fact lying about the whole thing and never went through a test. However, now will be his test, as his wife is chained up and only has 1 hour to live unless he can navigate tests and save her. The first test we see shows as his publicist is in a trap with spikes all around her throat. The spikes are attached to audio meters, which will move the spikes closer to her neck with any loud noises. However, the key to release her is attached to a fish hook which is in her stomach. Bobby has to pull the hook out in time, but she makes way too much noise and is killed in the process. The next trap sees Bobby's lawyer in a machine with spikes that will pierce her eyes and mouth unless he can calf raise a spiked weight until the time limit expires. However, once again he's unable to do this as the pain and the weight are too much and he fails, leading to her death. This then leads to the next trap, which takes place in a second-story room with no floor save for a few broken floorboards in precarious locations. Bobby's best friend, who knew of his lies, is blindfolded and has a mechanical noose attached to his neck. Bobby has 1 minute to find a key and get it to him before he's hung. However, Bobby throws the key to his friend, and it unfortunately drops to the floor, resulting in the friend being hung and killed. Meanwhile, after examining footage of Hoffman, Agent Gibson figures out where his base of operations is, and it's actually located in a scrapyard featuring a Saw game we saw earlier in the movie. This trap featured a group of skinheads who were connected to a car that would start and kill all of them within a short period of time. The driver of the car was played by the late Chester from Linkin Park, who has to rip his own skin off, which is stuck to a seat, in order to pull a lever and save everyone. However, he's unable to do this, and all of them die in a massive wreck. And after an explosion that happens when the cops are all investigating the scene, this seemed like the last place Hoffman would be. However, Gibson is right and he discovers Hoffman's base. But soon after that, he sees Hoffman has propped up one of the dead skinheads in a chair and knew they were coming. In fact, he used the earlier explosions to swap places with the corpse in a body bag which was being brought to the station where Jill was being kept. However, before Gibson can warn them, he and his group are killed by an automatic gun turret. Hoffman then emerges from the body bag and, like the Terminator, kills everyone in the police station before abducting Jill. Next, we see as Bobby enters the final room of his game where his wife is being held. However, she's behind electric wire. The only way for Bobby to free her is to do what he claimed, which is to put hooks through his pectoral muscles, hoist himself to the top of a chain, and attach together two electrical wires. However, as he's hoisting himself up, the hooks tear through his chest and he falls to the floor. His wife is then encased in a giant metal pig and burned alive while he watches in terror. We then see as Hoffman attaches Jill to a chair and, in a bit of poetic justice, places the same reverse bear trap on her that she used on him in the last film. However, this time, she can't escape and is killed when the trap goes off. After all of this is over, we see as Hoffman covers his workshop in gasoline and sets it ablaze. As he leaves the scene, he's attacked by three people in pig masks. The leader takes off his mask, revealing himself to be Dr. Gordon. In flashbacks, we see as Jigsaw saves Gordon after he cauterized his leg, and Gordon became his apprentice. He was actually the one who found Dr. Lin for Jigsaw in Saw 3 and sent the letter to Hoffman in a previous movie saying he knew who he was. In the final scene of the movie, Hoffman wakes up to find himself chained up in the bathroom from the original Saw. However, Gordon takes the bone saw that he used to cut his own foot off and throws it into the hallway, leaving Hoffman with seemingly no way to escape. He turns the lights off and shuts the door, saying game over, before leaving Hoffman to what seems like is his death. And with that, Saw 7 came to an end. Honestly, while I like the ending in some points of the movie, this is probably the weakest of the bunch. It seems like it focused too much on traps at points, and Bobby wasn't really that interesting of a protagonist. Seeing Dr. Gordon and his story continue is a highlight, and something you can argue was foreshadowed in the original movie. However, I didn't care for how some things wrapped up, such as Jill's death. The ending itself wasn't bad though. Now, as for my overall thoughts on the series, I really enjoy it. 1 and 2 are the best of the bunch, while the rest go up and down in quality. This series has some cool traps, interesting moral dilemmas, and a great modern horror villain in Jigsaw, who is like a 2000s Freddy Krueger or Pinhead. And the score for these movies is always top-notch, with the Saw theme being up there among the classics like John Carpenter's Halloween theme. These movies, however, are by no means perfect, and they're definitely not for everyone. But they accomplished a lot and made a huge impact with a small budget, which is really commendable. Now, did the marathon itself improve the viewing experience? As far as continuity goes and remembering all the little things that make a difference later on, yes, you gain a greater appreciation for the continuity in these films and how closely connected everything is by watching them together, whereas you may forget things watching them spaced far apart. However, watching 7 films back to back can really be tough, and honestly, not all of them are that great. So for the casual film fan, I would say you can just watch 1 and 2 and skip the rest if you like. But for hardcore Saw fans who are up for the challenge, you're welcome to try it. As far as my rankings, I'd probably list them from best to worst in this order. Some are a little harder to figure out than others, but I think this lines up with my thoughts while watching them. Now, as we know, the next entry in the Saw franchise, Jigsaw, is out right now in theaters, so I might as well give my expectations before I go see and review it. Coming out so long after these films, the new film has the opportunity to reflect on the series, as well as feedback from the fans and to adjust their story accordingly. And additionally, I expect this film to have more crazy traps, moral dilemmas, and likely more flashbacks giving us greater insight into John Kramer as a person. However, I'm not expecting something as good as the first 2, but if it's better than 7, I'm sure I'll enjoy it. And if Jigsaw is successful, who knows how many more sequels they'll end up making next. Alright guys, this has been my marathon review of the Saw movies. Let me know your own thoughts down below, what you thought of the series, and if you've ever marathoned it in the past. Also, what are some other franchises you'd like to see me or guests marathon in the future? Let me know down below. And if you like this channel and this content, subscribe and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out.
Yes, and you'd better subscribe and enable those notifications.